Shalom, my friends. My name is Elisa Moed, and I am the CEO and founder of Traveluia.com. Traveluia has three goals. One, we want to connect people to Israel and the ancient modern stones. Two, we want to inspire people to come and visit Israel one day. And three, we want to create life-changing experiences that not only reinforce their faith in God, but also deepen their engagement with Israel. And I hope one day soon we'll all be returning back to our normal lives. But until then, I wanted to give an opportunity to connect even further with Israel. And so what we've decided is to offer an opportunity to connect with Israel online and learn about the weekly Torah portion, the Parshat. And in order to do this, I'm introducing you to one of our most amazing tour guides, tour educators. His name is Itamar Ben David, and he lives in Jerusalem. I live in Tel Aviv, and it gives me much pleasure to introduce you to Itamar, who I know you're going to connect with almost immediately. So I'm going to bid you adieu for now and hand it over to Itamar in Jerusalem. Lehitraot.
My name is Itamar Ben David. I'm a tour guide here in Israel. Right now, the airport is, as you know, closed. Everyone is under lockdown. But besides of guiding tours, I also love reading the Bible, and I want to share some of the teachings of this week from the reading. Now, something that you have to know is that Jews read the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in a certain order within 1 year. So every year we basically finish to read all these first 5 books of the Old Testament. So each portion is called in Hebrew Parshat, and this week we read the first few chapters of the book of Leviticus. Now, this is the beginning of a new month, the month of Nisan. That's how it's called, the month of Nisan in Hebrew. We have the Hebrew calendar clearly, and in the Bible, these names don't appear. It appears as the first month. Okay, that's how it's called. The month of Nisan is the first month, which brings me to a conundrum. If it's the first month, so this is the beginning of the year, right? Yes, the answer is yes. This is the beginning of the Jewish year. Hey, Itamar, wait. We know that there is a holiday called Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and it doesn't happen until somewhere in September. So how come you have 2 New Years? The answer is yes, we have 2 New Years in every year. The first one is on Nisan. The second one is on Rosh Hashanah, which is on the seventh month. Okay. Now, why is that so important? And this brings me to now to the things we're going to deal with. We have the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, which was mentioned in the book of Exodus, the last few chapters of the book of Exodus, the portion, the parasha that we read last week, is speaking about the building of the Mishkan. And the Mishkan was initiated, the tent of meeting was initiated on the 1st of Nisan, the first, right now, like yesterday. So that's one thing. Having said that, the temple, the first temple built by King Solomon, was initiated on the 7th month. Very strange why the tent of meeting was initiated back then in the 1st month, and the temple built by Solomon on the 7th month. We have to understand a few other things about these moments, I would say, in the Jewish timeline. The first month, month of Nisan, this is also the time of salvation for the children of Israel. They were saved from Egypt. They were enslaved in Egypt under Pharaoh, and they were saved by Moses. This is the time of salvation for the children of Israel. That's what Passover, the Jewish Passover, is all about. But then we have on the 7th month another tradition that Adam, the first man, he was created on the first day of the 7th month. So we have Adam as a prototype of the entire mankind, created on the 7th month, and we have the salvation of the children of Israel on the 1st month. Very confusing, I know, very confusing, but that's life. Okay, so we'll take that, and now we're going to take it to the next stage. The Parasha that we read this week is, as I said, the first few chapters of the book of Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus is probably the most difficult book to read for the gentle and delicate reader of 2020. It speaks about the sacrifices in the Mishkan, later the tent of meeting, and later in the temple. It speaks about blood, guts, slicing meat, burning meat, etc., etc. Very graphic, very detailed, and very unpleasant. If you're vegetarian, you will probably skip these chapters right away. If you're vegan, you would ask the whatever authorities to take this book out of the Bible, but it's there, so we cannot ignore it. And as we're going to see later, it's not just about the Jewish teachings. I'm going to talk also about the Christian teaching and the Christian understanding of it. So we'll get there, and we'll see how relevant it is for Christians as well. The thing about the details of the sacrifice, it's very detailed. What do you sacrifice, and when do you sacrifice, and if you sinned, what kind of offering you bring, etc., etc. But there is one important detail to know. You have to put some salt on the sacrifice. You have to pour some salt on the sacrifice. There are numerous reasons why we do that, why we used to do that back in the days of the temple. And I'll get to it in a moment. But Jews today, before we eat bread, we're supposed to dip 3 times the bread in salt. Most Jews during the week, they don't necessarily do that. There is some salt anyway in modern breads, but on Shabbat, Shabbat Eve, we basically do it in a more ceremonious way with the challah bread. We put the challah bread, a piece of the challah bread, in the salt 3 times, and then we, the first one, eat, then the second one, etc., etc., until the whole family and guests ate the bread with the salt. Now, why do we need this salt? Salt is a very confusing symbol. It symbolizes destruction. Okay, places back in the ancient times were destroyed. When cities were destroyed, if they revolt against whatever king, whatever empire, not only that the city was destroyed, also they salted the land next to the city so nothing could grow in it. So it's a symbol of destruction in the Bible. And there is Abimelech that destroyed the city of Shechem, of Nablus, and it says specifically in the book of Judges that he also salted the land of Nablus. But having said that, salt is also a symbol of a life of covenant. In the book of Chronicles, it says that God have a covenant of salt with King David himself. So salt is also a symbol for eternity because it doesn't rot, nothing happens to it. It's for preservation as well, and that's where it comes from as well. Okay, so we have this dual meaning of the salt. Now we'll get to the next stage, and we'll talk about the sacrifice and the prayer. If we have the sacrifice that are salted, okay, what is that for compared to the prayer? Everyone knows that the main practice, definitely since for Jews, definitely since the destruction of the temple, is the prayer and not the sacrifice. We don't slay animals anymore. And we have to understand that in the Jewish understanding of it, sacrifice is very different than prayer. The sacrifice is supposed to hold the world in its natural order. It's also supposed to elevate not just the man that sacrifice the animal to cover his own sin, it's also supposed to elevate nature as well, so it won't be in its miserable situation now, it will be elevated to God. That's a very important Jewish concept, that we try to repair the world, tikkun olam, that's how it's called. We try to elevate and repair the world. We're not desperate from the world, even though there was the sin back in heaven. We think that we can correct the world, and not just the mankind, also the flaws of nature. So that's the sacrifice. Prayer, on the other hand, is not to keep the world in its order. It's in the purpose of the prayer, in the Jewish understanding of it, is to change the nature, is to create miracles almost, is to ask God to intervene in the miserable situation that every individual is in, or the collective, the group, or the specific, more specifically, the children of Israel is in. So that's the two different meanings of the sacrifice compared to the prayer. After all of what we said, I'll just say that in the temple in Jerusalem, we basically try to elevate nature and mankind, and we try to use the salt also to create this covenant between God and mankind. Now, so far we talked about the Jewish tradition, and definitely in these chaotic times that we have coronavirus raging all over the world, we need a little bit of miracle as well. So pray, not necessarily just eat bread with salt as a symbol of a sacrifice. Okay, just like we, as I said, just like we salten the sacrifices, so we put the bread in the salt as well today. But the sacrifice is not necessarily enough. We need a miracle. We need some intervention to help mankind right now. But right now I want to jump to the New Testament. In the New Testament, there are two important quotes that I want to read to you. The first one is from Mark. It appears in other Gospels, but I'll read the one from the book of the Gospel by Mark, chapter 9, verse 49. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "For everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt loses its taste, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves, and have peace with one another." Basically, Jesus say, you are the sacrifice. You are the sacrifice. The Christian believers, you are the sacrifice, and you're supposed to have salt in you already, and then you basically elevate yourself. It's not a foreign idea for Christianity. Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice, died for the sins of mankind. Not necessarily seasoned with salt, but the concept again of an ultimate sacrifice to cover the ultimate sin, of course, exists, and that's basically the Mass. The Mass, that every Mass or Communion, Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, that's basically the different names. As far as I know, in churches they don't put the holy bread in salt or anything, but the people themselves supposed to have salt in them. So that's again an ancient teaching from the Old Testament that found its way clearly to the New Testament. Another example for that is from the Epistle to the Colossians, chapter 4, verse 6. It says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." Okay, so again, the idea of salt as a symbol of grace, as a symbol of correcting mankind. Again, seasoned with salt. Your speech is seasoned with salt, so you can convince others. You have flavor, so people taste from the gospel, and then they would live not just by the bread alone, but also by the word of God alone. So this is again the Jewish Parsha again from Leviticus, and its new meaning. When you will come to Israel, if you are watching me, when you will come to Israel, you're more than welcome to visit the Dead Sea. It has plenty of salt over there. You'll be able to visit clearly Jerusalem and see where all these things happened, where all these teachings were written and told. So I invite you for a lovely adventure in Israel when all this crazy, chaotic time ends. So this is me, Itamar Ben David. I did it for my friend Elisa from Traveluya, and you're more than welcome to follow up. This is just the first video. I hope we'll have some more. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody, and thank you, Itamar, for putting this together. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you'll tune in next week on our next Parsha of the week. Until then, Shabbat Shalom, and have a very, very healthy week.